A former president, Yoon Suk Yeol, has just been sentenced to life in prison.
It is a monumental decision. And to be clear right off the bat for everyone listening, this isn't your standard um, political corruption scandal.
Right, we've seen those.
We aren't talking about embezzlement or bribery here, which, to be fair, we have seen in South Korean politics before.
Plenty of times. But no, this is something else entirely.
This is about the very survival of a democracy. We are talking about a charge of leading an insurrection.
Leading an insurrection. I mean, that is a phrase that just stops you in your tracks.
It really does.
We aren't just going to look at the headline, though that life sentence is huge. We need to unpack the chaotic, almost movie-like 6 hours in December 2024 that led us to this moment.
The timeline is crucial.
It is. We are going to look at the legal reasoning behind why the court called this an insurrection, and we really need to talk about what this means for the future of South Korea.
And we have a really comprehensive stack of sources today to do exactly that for you. We're pulling directly from court documents, the official reporting on the verdict from the Seoul Central District Court, and some deep analysis of this whole 14-month legal saga that followed the martial law decree.
I have to admit, reading through the timeline of that night in December 2024, it just feels surreal.
Now, it reads like fiction.
It reads like a political thriller script written by someone with an overactive imagination. But before we get to the helicopters and the barricades, let's just start with the news that just broke.
The verdict.
Right. The Seoul Central District Court has handed down its decision. Yoon Suk Yeol, who is now 65 years old, is looking at spending the rest of his natural life behind bars.
It is the headline ruling of the year, arguably the decade for the region. The court found him guilty of the core charge, which is leading an insurrection.
Wow.
Now, to understand the gravity of this, you have to look at the South Korean criminal code. Because for this specific charge, the stakes are absolute.
So it's not like there's a sliding scale of punishment here, like a tier system.
Not really, no. Under Article 87 of the Criminal Act, for the quote-unquote ringleader of an insurrection, there are only two potential penalties on the table: death or life imprisonment.
Just those two. Wow, so it's completely binary. There's no 15 years and you're out on parole kind of option.
Exactly. It's all or nothing. And you have to remember, the prosecutors actually went into this trial demanding the death penalty.
They did?
Yes. They argued that the attempt to subvert the Constitution using military force warranted the ultimate punishment.
That puts the life sentence in a really specific context then. So life imprisonment was actually the lesser of the two options available to the judge.
Correct. And that's where the judge, Ji Guyan, really had to lay out his reasoning very, very carefully. The court explicitly stated that Yoon flouted legal procedures and resorted to violent means.
The violent means part is key.
It is. The judge was very clear that the intent here wasn't just to restore order, as Yoon had claimed, but to incapacitate the National Assembly.
That phrase, incapacitate the National Assembly, it really sticks out to me in the sources. It sounds technical, but let's unpack that for a second. It basically means shutting down the people's representatives, right?
Precisely. It means breaking the legislative branch so the executive can just rule without checks and balances. The judge noted that the damage to democratic norms and to South Korean society as a whole was incalculable. That's the exact word he used in the ruling. Incalculable.
But getting back to the sentence itself, why life and not death? If the damage was truly incalculable, why did the judge show that level of leniency?
Well, the judge did weigh mitigating factors. He cited Yoon's age, he's 65, and crucially, the fact that Yoon refrained from using lethal force during the event itself.
Right, nobody actually died that night, which is honestly a miracle given the description of the scene we're about to get into.
It is a profound miracle. However, there were aggravating factors too. The judge pointed out that Yoon has completely refused to apologize.
Not once.
Not once. Throughout this entire 14-month saga, he has shown absolutely no remorse for the chaos he caused.
Which is a perfect transition, actually. Because to understand why a lack of remorse is such a big deal and why the court took this so seriously, we have to go back to what he actually did. Let's rewind the tape to the night of December 3rd, 2024.
The night of the 6 hours.
6 hours. The sources paint such a vivid picture of this. It's late at night. Yoon goes on national TV and declares martial law.
Out of nowhere.
Right out of nowhere. Immediately, things go sideways. We're talking about a sudden suspension of political activities and the military rapidly moving to take control of the media. But it's the visuals at the parliament that really get me.
It was pure chaos. You had military helicopters descending right onto the grounds of the National Assembly. And not just hovering, landing.
Helicopters. in the middle of a modern capital city,
Yes.
and that you have armed troops trying to literally storm the actual legislative chamber. The sources describe lawmakers, their staff, and even regular citizens rushing to barricade the entrances.
That image is what stays with people. They weren't using high-tech security doors. They were literally piling up furniture.
Desks, chairs.
Sofas, filing cabinets, whatever they could find to physically block the soldiers from getting in.
It was a literal physical confrontation between the military and the civil institutions of the country.
It was. And that is exactly where the timeline becomes so incredibly critical, because this entire decree, this martial law, it only lasted 6 hours.
That's the turning point we need to highlight for you. It wasn't a weeks-long standoff where everyone went home and negotiated over a table. It was immediate, visceral resistance.
Because the lawmakers actually managed to get inside. Despite the troops, despite the absolute chaos outside, enough of them gathered in the chamber to legally hold a vote.
And they voted unanimously to block the decree.
Unanimously. Under the South Korean constitution, once the assembly votes to lift martial law, the president must comply.
So the system worked.
It worked, but by the absolute skin of its teeth. That vote forced Yoon to withdraw the order, and the fallout from that was instantaneous.
Let's trace that fallout really quickly.
He was impeached just 11 days later on December 14th. Then came the arrest in January 2025, which, by the way, involved a tense standoff at his own home. And he was formally expelled from office in April 2025.
It's a staggering fall from grace. Just a complete collapse of a presidency in slow motion, and an all at once.
Yeah.
But I want to pause on the motive for a second, on the why.
It's important to look at his reasoning.
Right. Because when you read Yoon's defense in these court documents, and we are just reporting his stated views impartially here, he doesn't sound like someone who thinks he's a villain. He has a very specific narrative.
He does. And in the interest of understanding the full picture, we have to look at his perspective. Yoon argued in court that he viewed the opposition party as anti-state forces.
That is a very heavy accusation to throw around in a functioning democracy. Anti-state forces.
It is. He actually claimed they were sympathetic to North Korea. He described the legislature as a den of criminals. His main argument was that they were paralyzing his government through constant impeachments of his officials and slashing his budgets. In his mind, the government was completely gridlocked.
So his defense was that this wasn't a coup, it was what was the word he used? A warning.
Exactly. He argued the martial law was a warning to awaken the people and break the gridlock. He maintained that he acted within his constitutional authority as president to save the nation from a severe crisis. He claimed he never intended to actually destroy the legislature or permanently seize power.
But the court didn't buy that for a second.
Not at all. And here is where the rebuttal comes in from the legal side. The judge ruled that the intent was clearly to paralyze the National Assembly. You can't stand there and say it's just a warning when you dispatch armed soldiers to arrest your political opponents.
It's the difference between shouting fire to wake people up and actually pouring gasoline and burning the building down.
Right. And he didn't just go after the usual suspects either. The evidence showed clear attempts to arrest the opposition leader, Lee Jae-myung, which you might expect in this kind of extreme scenario. But he also tried to detain Han Dong-hoon.
Who was the leader of his own party.
Exactly. That detail is so crucial. It completely undermines the idea that this was just partisan fighting.
Yeah, that changes the context entirely.
When you use the military to neutralize the separation of powers and arrest leadership across the board, even your own allies who happen to disagree with you, the court says that is insurrection. It's a direct attempt to destroy the constitutional order.
It wasn't just him, though. I think it's really easy to focus on the guy at the top, the face on the TV. But the president can't storm a building by himself. There was a whole cast of characters involved in this.
It was a massive systemic failure involving the upper echelons of the entire security apparatus. Over 40 officials have been tried in connection with this, and the sentences for the accomplices are very heavy, which really signals how seriously the court is taking the chain of command here.
Let's run through some of those names.
Yeah.
Who were the key players that actually made this happen on the ground?
First, you have Kim Young-hyun, the former defense minister. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison.
30 years.
He actually admitted to ordering the soldiers to enact the martial law. He was the operational hand of the whole thing.
That is massive. 30 years is effectively a life sentence for someone of his age.
Then there's Han Duck-soo, the former prime minister. He got 23 years. Now, this is historically significant because he is the first administration official, someone from the civilian side of the cabinet, to be convicted of insurrection.
Usually in these types of historical coups, the charges mostly land on the military figures, right?
Correct. Usually the civilians claim they were just pushing paper or didn't know the full extent of the military's plans. But this verdict shows the civilian government was deeply complicit.
Then there was the interior minister, too.
Yes, Lee Songdan, the former interior minister, he got 7 years. And the convictions went all the way down to the police leadership as well. The former heads of the National Police Agency and the Seoul Police were both found guilty.
It really was a purge of the top brass, a complete cleaning of house. I saw a note in the sources about his wife, Kim Keon-hee. She's in prison, too.
She is, though it is very important to distinguish the cases so we don't get them confused. She's currently serving a sentence for bribery.
Okay, so that's separate.
It's unrelated to the insurrection charge itself, but when you zoom out, it adds a lot of vital context to the collapse of the Yoon administration.
It paints a picture of a presidency that was beleaguered on all sides before the martial law decree even happened.
Exactly. It sets the stage for a leader who might have felt entirely cornered.
So the verdict is in. Life in prison for the former president. But reading about the scene outside the court from our sources, this doesn't feel over. The country seems incredibly divided.
Deeply divided. The reaction outside the Seoul Central District Court was like a split screen of modern South Korea. On one side, you had Yoon's supporters. They were tearful. They view this entire trial as a political show.
The sources mention that Yoon has kind of reinvented him, right? Even after being removed from office.
Yes. Despite being unpopular generally during his term, he has cultivated a very loyal base as a populist right-wing figure. His supporters see him as a martyr who tried to save the country from anti-state elements. They truly believe the narrative he sold them.
And on the other side of that split screen,
the opposition naturally sees this as a massive victory for the rule of law. Cho Kuk, the leader of the Rebuilding Korea Party, called the verdict a confirmation that the, quote, power lies within the people. They see the life sentence as the democratic system successfully defending itself against a dictator.
But legally speaking, this isn't the end of the road, is it? We're definitely going to see appeals.
Oh, absolutely. Yoon's lawyers have explicitly vowed to fight to the end. There will be appeals. He has a week to formally appeal the verdict. But what is really fascinating, and frankly a little terrifying, is that there are still other charges pending against him.
Right. The drone charge. I read this part of the source notes, and I had to double-check I wasn't reading a spy novel. Can we talk about that?
This is where the story gets really dark. Prosecutors are pursuing an additional charge that Yoon aided an enemy state.
Aided an enemy state? That sounds exactly like treason.
It effectively is. The core allegation is that Yoon secretly deployed drones to provoke a conflict with North Korea.
Wait, so the theory from the prosecution is that he tried to start a literal fight with the North just to have an excuse to declare martial law in the South?
That is exactly the prosecution's claim. They argue it was a completely manufactured crisis designed to justify the domestic crackdown. Think about the sheer implications of that if it's proven true.
That is some wag-the-dog level stuff right there.
It is. If that goes to trial and he is convicted on that charge as well, it adds a whole other layer of gravity to this entire saga. It suggests the martial law wasn't just a desperate reaction to domestic political gridlock, but a highly planned operation involving national security manipulation. It suggests he was literally willing to risk war to save his political skin.
That is absolutely wild. It really puts the insurrection charge into a much broader, more dangerous perspective.
And we should definitely connect this to history. We mentioned at the top of the deep dive that this has historic weight. This is the first time in 30 years that a South Korean leader has been sentenced for insurrection.
You're referring to 1996, right?
Yes, the trial of Chun Do-hwan. He was convicted for the 1979 military coup and the Gwangju massacre. He was actually sentenced to death initially, though it was later commuted to life, and eventually he was pardoned.
So there is a precedent for this kind of high-level accountability, but it's a precedent from a very different era of South Korean history.
Exactly. The 1996 trial was retrospective. It was about reckoning with a dictatorship from the past years and years after the fact. The trial of Yoon Suk Yeol is entirely different. It is about a modern, functioning democracy dealing with a direct threat from within, basically in real time.
It's a stress test for the current system.
Exactly. It's a literal test of the guardrails we always talk about in political science.
Well, let's wrap this up. We have a former president sentenced to life for trying to turn the military on his own parliament. We have a country that is polarized, but whose legal institutions seem to be holding firm under immense pressure.
And we have a very clear message from the court. In a democracy, you cannot use violence to break a political stalemate. The cost of doing so is your freedom for life.
It really makes you think. We talk about institutions and laws saving democracy all the time. We like to imagine the Constitution as this magic, impenetrable shield. But when I read about those lawmakers and regular citizens piling up furniture against those doors, it wasn't a piece of paper that stopped those soldiers. It was people.
That is the ultimate takeaway here. The law provided the framework, the constitutional vote to block the decree, but it required actual physical courage to buy the time for that vote to happen.
So here's the thought I want to leave you with today.
Mm.
We often assume that written constitutions protect us from tyranny. But looking at those 6 hours in Seoul, you have to ask yourself, in a modern democracy, are written laws ever enough to stop an insurrection? Or does it always, in the end, come down to the individuals in the room who are willing to barricade the door?